you have more than a hope and a prayer of really setting a direction in the environment in which we're all tasked with making strategy, which is crazy. It's, rapidly changing. It's constantly changing, highly volatile. You really do need an approach that includes the irrational as well as the rational dimensions. I also think it's very helpful to have leaders at every level of the organization who really do get this, who can role model it through daily practice. And asking those good questions, that takes courage, and it tends to change the culture of an organization. Sometimes the very best strategic thinkers are people who have never had a seat at a strategy table. And I think this is one of the surprising things, and probably one of the most amazing things about learning strategic thinking, is that it's incredible who shows up as being really good strategic thinkers when you can really open it up. Strategic thinking is really one dimension of strategy. So we have strategy, which is the big thing. And then what I have done is take a look at three different dimensions of strategy. One is strategic thinking, another is strategic planning, and another is strategic implementation. And I look at it based on the underlying cognitions, or the kind of thinking that's required for each one. So strategic thinking tends to be the least studied and probably the most important of all the dimensions of strategy. And it's really about keeping a tight focus on the problem rather than jumping to a solution. Strategic planning, by contrast, tends to focus on the solution. I think that when you bring together strategic thinking and lateral thinking, these two things fit together like a hand and a glove. Well, lateral thinking draws very heavily on the irrational thinking domain, which is why I just love lateral thinking, because there's nothing that really supports the irrational concept of strategic thinking any more than lateral thinking does. But irrational thinking is really a kind of knowing. It's a way of knowing that's very different than rational thinking. And rational thinking, as we know, it's what we're all taught in formal education. It's very important. It's very necessary. It's the linear, logical, analytical, reductionist type of thinking that we're all taught. It's taught in a straight line thinking. Irrational thinking is another way of knowing. It's another way of making meaning. And it uses very, very different types of thinking. It uses intuition. It uses emotion. It uses imagination. It uses conceptual thinking. And it tends to work very well when we're in a state of imbalance or disorientation. This goes right back to complex problems again, because complex problems tend to put us into a state of disequilibrium or a state of imbalance. So I think anybody who is really determined to become a really first-rate strategist really needs to be very, very adept at rational thinking and irrational thinking. And I think, if you can find a way to really take and study lateral thinking and strategic thinking and pull these two together, it really paying attention to it and really practicing to it, you've just got a real leg up. So increased participation is something that I think you can reasonably expect to see. More diverse and more inclusive participation is something also that, a lot of times we need to take a look at who's included in our current strategy sessions. And I think it's very, very quick turnaround to be able to measure and to see that strategic thinking, when it's paired with lateral thinking, is going to give a pretty quick uptick on that. It increases engagement, the perception of engagement. So those two things are really important. It tends to generate more and better ideas. It ultimately tends to result in more decisions and better decisions in terms of the quality of ideas, and a shorter turnaround time for strategic implementation, simply because more people have been involved in the process. So those are some things in terms of tangible items that you can put metrics around. I think in terms of intangibles, which I think when we're looking at complex problems and long-term impact on strategic thinking, I think some intangibles that I hear hear all the time that are even more important is confidence amongst leadership, that giving people a little bit of knowledge and giving people tons of practice really elevates their confidence in terms of being able to put this stuff to practice, being able to be used and seen and respected as role models. So confidence is a big one. Courage is another one. I think when people have the knowledge and they have the confidence, they're going to have the courage to really use strategic thinking in their day-to-day activities, and that they really will take the courage to ask some difficult questions that maybe have gotten shelved in the past. Another intangible that I hear all the time is that it's increased trust amongst people. And I think that comes from the fact that we're pulling people in who don't normally get included in strategy conversations. And that just pulling people in gives people a sense of contribution. And this increases, again, confidence. It increases trust. And another intangible is loyalty to the organization. When people feel that they've been included in something as important as strategic thinking conversations. Another intangible that I hear all the time is that around team building and team trust is elevated when everybody has the same knowledge base and is working towards skills for developing strategic thinking. Flexibility and adaptability, again, intangibles, but those are important things that get elevated with strategic thinking. So I think the whole idea of dividing it into tangibles and intangibles can be helpful sometimes for people to understand in terms of short-term and long-term benefits.
Very impressive. One thing that I take away with what you just said is good strategic thinking will make both strategic planning and strategic implementation cool, breeze, easy go, because the teams are now trained on thinking better. So the action planning is going to be better. The implementation is going to be better. I see that.
And that's so well said, Sunil. That's just so well said, because, if we look at the three dimensions of a strategy, strategic thinking, strategic planning, and strategic implementation, there's tons and tons of resources that are poured into strategic planning and strategic implementation. But there's very, very little that's put into strategic thinking. And when you look at the returns in terms of successful strategic implementations, it's bleak. It's pitiful. It's terrible. And I think when people can begin to put their efforts into strategic thinking and know that they can utilize that any point in the year, they're going to get a much better strategic plan, and they're going to up their chances of getting successful implementation.